The Villisca Axe Murders, 8 souls lost in one night. The house at the end of the street was too quiet for a Monday morning. No clatter of breakfast, no steps on the porch, only a clock ticking in a room where no one moved. When the front door finally opened, it was not the owner who stepped in. It was a worried neighbor and a brother with a spare key. Their shoes whispered across the kitchen floor. A small oil lamp sat in a strange place, its chimney removed, its wick turned low as if someone had carried it in a hand and hid the light. The blinds were drawn tight. Shirts and skirts were draped over the mirrors. A plate of food sat out, but was not eaten. The men did not know it yet, but they were walking into a true horror, a real case that still puzzles the United States more than 100 years later. Ross Moore called out, "Josiah? Sarah?" He waited. The house held its breath. In the first bedroom off the parlor, he saw a blanket pulled to a chin that would never move again. His voice bent into a small sound. The neighbor, Mary's husband from next door, grabbed the doorframe to steady himself. The bed at the back of the room held 2 small shapes under sheets. On the floor, near the dresser, lay a heavy farm tool with a dark handle. No one touched it. No one could. Ross stumbled back into the kitchen and sent a boy to run for the marshal. Minutes later, Marshal Hank Horton pushed through the front door. The clock kept ticking, counting the seconds this house would become a story forever. What happened in Villisca, Iowa, the night of June 9th into the early hours of June 10th, 1912, is simple to tell and impossible to explain. The Moore family, Josiah and Sarah and their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, went to church on Sunday night. It was Children's Day at the Presbyterian Church, a happy evening with songs and poems. 2 friends of Catherine's, sisters named Ina and Lena Stillinger, were allowed to sleep over after the event. It was summer. The light stayed long. Neighbors saw the family walk home around 9:45 p.m. laughing on the sidewalk. That was the last time anyone outside the house saw them alive. By sunrise, the house should have been awake. Cows needed milking. Chores needed doing. Mary Peckham, the neighbor, noticed nothing moved in the Moore yard. No one came to the pump. Laundry stayed on the line. At 7 o'clock a.m., she stepped to the porch and listened. The silence felt wrong. She knocked. No answer. She tried the door. It was locked. She let the chickens out of their coop and watched the windows from her yard, waiting for a curtain to twitch. When nothing happened, she called Josiah's brother, Ross. He brought a key. That is how the day began to break. The house had signs that a stranger had been there. Marshal Horton saw them as he moved carefully, keeping his hands to himself. Windows were covered from the inside with clothes or newspapers. A bowl with water sat in the kitchen, stained pink as if someone had washed their hands. A slab of bacon, bigger than a hand, leaned against a wall in the downstairs bedroom. It did not belong where it was. The oil lamp was strange too, placed on the floor as if to throw light low without showing in the windows. The bed sheets were pulled up over faces. The bodies were not shown to the men for long. The marshal closed the doors and sent everyone out to the yard. Word spread up and down the street like wind. People came. Too many people. Some stepped inside, even when they should not have, and that made the work harder later. But by then, the story had already written itself. 8 souls lost in one night. Back at the church the night before, the children took turns at the front. Herman spoke his piece clean and clear. Catherine held her friend's hand and smiled from the front pew. Little Paul swung his feet and tried to sit still. Sarah helped with the program. Josiah locked up the family's small store before church, a good man with a tidy shop. These are plain facts, simple and true. That is what makes the next part hit so hard. A true event should have a reason. This one never did. When the marshal went upstairs, the air felt thick. He kept the lamp low and quiet in his hand. The master bedroom held Josiah and Sarah under heavy quilts. He did not say much. He did not linger. Past that room were the beds for the boys and the girls. He saw what he had to see, and then backed away so the coroner could do his work. Each bed had the same strange care. Faces covered, small mirrors hidden, blinds pinned shut. It was as if the person who did this wanted the house to look asleep, even after everything had gone wrong. Lena and Ina Stillinger, the guests, had slept downstairs in the parlor. The tool on the floor near them belonged to Josiah, taken from his shed. The handle showed new nicks, as if used in anger. Nothing about the scene was loud now. It was quiet in the way empty barns are quiet after a storm. The marshal called for the county doctor, the coroner, and the minister. He told Ross to keep people out. Ross tried. But small-town fear is a strange tide. Men wanted to see, to understand, to be sure. They walked dirt on the floorboards that later men would wish they could read. When the doctor arrived, he gave the first guesses on time. Sometime after midnight. He said everyone had been asleep. There were no signs of a long fight. He said it was one of the worst things he had ever seen, and he said it in a whisper, like he did not want the walls to hear. The coroner knows, dead, and made notes with a pencil that shook. Downstairs, someone prayed. Outside, curious eyes watched the front steps. Word reached the train depot. By the afternoon, reporters would be on their way. The simple parts are these. The family came home from church, beds were filled, a stranger waited. There was a small attic above the bedrooms, reached by a tiny door. Up there, investigators found a few soft stains on the floor and the small stubs of cigarettes. It looked like someone had sat in the cramped dark and waited, listening to the house go to sleep. That image stayed with everyone who heard it. A warm Sunday night. A man, or someone like a man, up in a small space, crouched and patient, while songs from church still hung in the air. It is not a crash or a fight that haunts people. It is that slow waiting. By noon on Monday, the county sheriff had arrived. He tried to clear the yard. He failed. The town could not look away. In the kitchen, the sheriff ran his hand over a tabletop and felt grit from all the shoes. He closed his eyes for a moment and tried to see the scene as it had been before the visitors. He asked himself the old questions any real case demands. How did the stranger get in? Did he come through a door left unlocked, as people often did in small towns then? How did he leave without anyone seeing him? Did he leave before dawn when the world was empty of eyes? He looked again at the lamp with the chimney off. The wick had been turned so low that the flame would be small and steady. He thought about how someone could carry such a lamp in one hand, moving room to room, light close to the floor so it did not show in a window. He thought about the clothes hung on mirrors, the blinds drawn with care, the sheet pulled over faces that would never look up again. It was an awful act, but it was a careful act. Whoever did this had time. That was the worst. First, we find the part. As the sheriff and the county men worked, the town started to list names. People are quick to point when they are afraid. A traveling man who slept in the nearby woods was questioned. A stranger at the train station. A preacher with a smile that did not feel right to some. A man who left town too fast. A cousin who had a reason to be angry. Some names faded. One or two grew louder. But this day was not for suspects yet. This day was for facts. The sheriff wrote what he saw. The doctor wrote what he measured. The men spoke low, because the air inside the house made them want to whisper. While they worked, memory kept tugging at them. Small, ordinary pictures from the night before. Townspeople remembered the church program, the way Sarah shook hands at the door, the way Josiah paused to talk with a man by the fence, the way the two Stillinger girls smiled when they were told they could sleep over. The small kindness of letting friends stay one night made the story break hearts over and over for years. It still does. By afternoon, crowds pressed the yard like a fair with no laughter. Some people crossed themselves. Some held handkerchiefs to their faces. Mothers pulled their children away. Farmers stood quiet with hats in their hands. Reporters wrote quickly, looking from the porch to the blinds to the faces in the crowd. The word axe jumped into headlines because it was simple and harsh. 8 souls lost in one night, one man scribbled in his notebook, and that summary never left the story again. Inside, the house seemed to push people back. Even the sheriff stepped outside for air more than once. When he came back to the kitchen, he felt the same wrong calm he had felt all morning. He could hear his own breath. He could hear the clock. He could not hear the past. He wanted the house to tell him a story, but the house, even full of evidence, spoke only in small clause, U.S. He looked toward the stairs and thought of the little hot space above them where someone had smoked, waiting for children to fall asleep. The sheriff stood under the attic hatch and raised the lamp. The light painted a small circle on the wood. He could see a smudge where a hand might have pushed, and he could smell something like old tobacco. He rested the lamp on a step and reached up to loosen the latch. A board creaked. The sound echoed in the strange hush. He lifted the panel an inch. Warm air kissed his wrist, and in that breath was the smell of long nights, the kind that hold rain and hay and, sometimes, something else. He lowered the panel again and stared at the space where the killer had likely waited. In that empty square, the case felt real in a new way. This was not a tale made to scare people. This was a place where a person had crouched and listened to a family say goodnight. The day wore on. Family members were told. A minister tried to pray with the words he knew, but the words felt small. People asked the same questions again and again. Who would do this? Why hide the mirrors? Why the careful blinds? Why leave the tool behind? The sheriff did not answer. He only said, "We will work." He did not know that years later, people would still say the same questions out loud when they stood on that front lawn and looked at those windows. As evening came, the house grew dark again, and the streets did too. The crowds thinned. Newsmen left to catch trains. The sheriff posted a guard. He wrote down a plan. He would talk to men in town who did not sleep well. He would listen for bragging without smiles. He would check the rail lines for a man who had blood under his fingernails when he bought a ticket. He would ask the state for help. He would turn the day over in his mind, over and over, like a stone in a pocket, until the sharp parts smoothed. That is what had honest officers do. He locked the door and told the guard to keep watch. But the story does not stop when a door is locked. A house that holds something this heavy does not rest. Later visitors, years later, would say they felt a cold weight when they stepped inside. They would say they heard small sounds in empty rooms. They would tell real horror stories to friends about a brush on the arm when no one was there. They would call it one of the most haunted homes in the country. Maybe that is because the case never found the answer it wanted. Maybe it is because people need a reason for a silence that loud. Maybe it is both. On that first day, as the guard leaned against the porch rail and watched the street, a train whistle carried across the fields. It was a plain sound, nothing scary at all. He listened to it fade and thought of the person who had done this, walking somewhere under the same sky. He wondered if that person was already far away or close enough to see the house from the cover of a tree. He wondered if the person would come back. He wondered a lot because the part that makes this story a true unsolved incident is that wondering never ended. Inside, the sheriff's lamp still warmed a circle on the hall floor where he had set it down. Dust motes moved in that small light like slow snow. The attic hatch above the glow looked like a dark mouth in the ceiling. The guard stepped in once before midnight to be sure the windows were latched and the blinds stayed tight. He checked the back door. He checked the latches. He made his way back to the front and stood with his hand on the knob, listening. The house gave him nothing. He turned the key and pulled the door snug. From the far end of the hall, a floorboard made one quiet, careful sound.